There lies a sleeping giant. Let him sleep, for when he wakes he will move the world. I thought that quote apt for this match between Alireza Firouzja and Vasyl Ivanchuk. So it was attributed to Napoleon Bonaparte, speaking of China apparently. And when you look at this match, how Alireza got off to an absolute flyer, 4-2 ahead, can Chucky bounce back? Well, it really makes me think of this sleeping giant. He's a giant of the chess world, such a dangerous and experienced player. What can he do to try and bounce back in this match? Well, he needs to strike soon with white. We've just had 2 back-to-back draws. So he goes pawn to e4 here. Let's see what happened. Alireza goes c5, a fighting Sicilian. And we go down these well-trodden opening moves here, heading down the Najdorf variation, named after Miguel Najdorf, the Polish-Argentinian grandmaster, and pawn a6 starts the variation. We had bishop to e2 now. There are millions of moves in that position. This is a good one. And now pawn e5, the principal break in the centre. It kicks the knight back, and we now have this weakness on d5, and Chucky immediately plays against that. So after bishop to e7, he goes bishop to g5. He's looking to give knight for bishop eventually to gain more control over this d5 square. So the knight came to d7, preparing to recapture here. We had pawn a4. This now clamps on the b5 break because we can see that this knight blocks the light squared bishop, and so black wants to develop it this way. And because black can't go b5 now, b6 is played instead. And the next move might look kind of strange from white, moving the same piece twice in the opening. The bishop comes to c4. I'll just show you why castles wasn't played. Now if bishop b7 comes, you're attacking this pawn twice, and it's a bit annoying for white to defend. You might have to go pawn f3 or bishop d3, queen d3. But what white's looking for as a setup is after bishop c4, bishop b7, now the queen can sit on e2. A much more harmonious setup. The d1 square is freed for a rook. This bishop's also improved onto this diagonal. So pawn h6 was now played, putting a question to the bishop, and this trade is very logical when you understand that there's a strategic battle going on for this d5 square. Both players now castled the king. The rook came to the d-file here, and Alireza spent about a minute here on this move. It slightly surprised me. He went queen to c7, most natural move in the position, connecting those rooks, looking down the c-file. And this is where a lot of black's counterplay is centred, because you've got this backwards d6 pawn. This is a long-term weakness, but black wants to play here, try and get a well-timed b5 or even d5 at the right moment, maybe f5, open the game up for the bishop to try and do well in the long term. But first you have to weather the storm. So knight d5 was played immediately by Chucky, and we had this mass exchange on the d5 square, but now the rook sits there and it's a bit uncomfortable. Black doesn't yet have a rook on the c-file, and so when the rook now hits it, white's in time to get c3. This is a really nice setup. So Alireza tries to trade the queens. He goes queen to c4. You can actually immediately trade here, and after rook recaptures, go knight d2. This is a nice endgame for one of the major reasons that you've got the better minor piece here. This knight's doing quite well in the closed positions. This is a bad bishop, and you've also got nice control on this file here against the backwards pawn. But instead of the queen trade, we had queen to c2, keeping a bit more tension and preparing to pick up that tempo on the queen with knight to d2. And now Alireza plays a bit hastily. He wants counterplay, he doesn't like to sit there, so he goes pawn to f5. But this is strategically risky, because after these pawns get exchanged here in some manner or other, then the knight can bounce around to d2 and land on the e4 square, where white will be doing excellently. So knight d2 was immediately played. Queen e2 could have been played, it was interesting, but here Alireza dropped back to c6. He now stops white from taking here because then you lose your rook. And so best here from Chucky would have actually been queen to d3. He holds the rook, also looks here, and it would pretty much force a capture on e4. Then your knight bounces in. but what he did was bring the other rook to the d file, and it just gives Alireza a moment to actually go pawn to f4. It's quite an ugly move because you put more pawns on dark squares here, make your bishop kind of hemmed in for the long term, but at least the knight doesn't hit e4 straight away. What we saw in the game here was it captures on e4, but this is positionally awful because now look at that wonderful knight, look at the pressure here. Now you could passively defend with say rook to d8 like this, but it's not really Alireza's style. There's no crushing blow, but white can just start improving on the light squares. Pawn b3, queen d3, pawn c4, pawn h3. Lots of small improving moves. Black is under pressure on the light squares. So Alireza goes rook to f4 rather, looking for that play. g3 kicks the rook. It came into f3 here, and now C'Chartres decides to actually just cash in on his position. He could go queen e2, just slowly improving, but knight d6 is also a great move. Although you give that knight for bishop if black were to take, now this didn't happen, you then get lots of new trumps in the position. Say queen c4, well now queen g6, and you're really pressuring the black king now. Excellent position for white. So we didn't have takes on d6 here. Instead, Alireza brought this rook across to the f-file, looking for play down here, but the knight just hopped back now, holds the f2 point. C'Chartres simply a pawn up now and an extra 2 minutes up on the clock. But this is Alireza. He's amazing in time pressure. What can he do here? And I do hope you're enjoying this video. Hit that like button to let me know, and do consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already done so to never miss one in this series. So after knight to e4, we had bishop to c5, activating onto that f2 pawn. And now the rook came back here defending. You could have already gone actually rook to d8 there to trade a pair off. But after b5 from Alireza, an exchange here, we see Ivanchuk do just that in this position. Does it a move later, but it's still an absolutely great move, doing really well. So Alireza drops the bishop back, he hits this d8 square, and now simply exchange here happened from Ivanchuk. The rook recaptured, and now he went queen to e2. Once again, just probing on these light squares, now looking at this weakened pawn. So king to h8 was played, prophylaxis, coming away from checks. Now we had pawn h4, and this is what the great players will do. Just take this time out to slowly improve the king. It now steps into h2 here, and now queen e6 was played from Alireza, but his time's getting really low, about 30 seconds or less. So pawn f3 now from C'Chartres. He just wants to secure this knight on f3. Queen b3, about 15 seconds on the clock for Alireza. Rook d7 came, and this is a rude awakening. Yes, you invaded, but now I'm on to your 7th rank. What are you doing with your bishop? So it comes to b6, but now rook b7 hits it and x-rays the pawn behind. The position is crumbling. So queen e6 defends, but now this one drops off. C'Chartres 2 pawns up. Surely he can't blow this one. Well, the bishop bounces back to d8. Queen d7 played, threatening mate. So the queen defended, but now simply rook to b8 was played, and this was actually the final move of the game. Here Alireza resigned. Why did he resign? Well, he's 2 pawns down, plus you can't really save material here. Say you come like this and we chop off, well now b4 is just killing it with those outside passed pawns. And if you go queen to e8 to defend the bishop, well we can just take here, the rook recaptures, and now knight d6 is a killer. You can't step up here or you lose your bishop. Say you go rook to f8, well now a simple tactic to finish. We take on d8, rook recaptures. This would be the final position. I hope you enjoyed this video. To see the rest in the playlist, click here, and subscribe to the channel, see below. Thanks for watching, see you soon.